The winter light falls pale through the tall windows of the Bendela block, casting long shadows across polished oak tables where maps of Europe lie spread like prophecies. Outside, snow drifts against the granite facades of government buildings. Inside, the air smells of tobacco and printer's ink. German military planners gather around intelligence reports freshly decoded from intercepted American industrial surveys. One officer reads aloud the production figures from Detroit's automobile factories. Another laughs, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoes off the vaulted ceiling. America, they agree, is a nation of shopkeepers and assembly line workers. A country that builds pleasure vehicles for Sunday drives. The laughter continues as they turn their attention back to the Ruhr Valley, to Krupp Steel, to the Tiger tanks that will surely decide the coming war. They do not yet understand what is crossing the Atlantic in those intercepted reports. They cannot see what is being born in the foundries of Pennsylvania and the assembly halls of Michigan. They measure American capacity by European standards, comparing the output of artisan workshops to mass production they have never witnessed. In 1940, the German war machine appears invincible. The Wehrmacht has crushed Poland in 27 days. The Luftwaffe owns the skies. Panzer divisions practice maneuvers that will soon tear through France like a scythe through summer wheat. German industry produces tanks the way watchmakers produce timepieces, with precision, with care, with individual attention to each mechanical heart. The Tiger tank takes 300,000 man-hours to build. Each one is a masterpiece of engineering. Each one is unique. Across the ocean, Henry Ford is thinking differently. He is thinking about the Model T, about the moving assembly line, about the moment in 1913 when he reduced the production time of an automobile from 12 hours to 93 minutes. He is thinking about volume. He is thinking about thousands. In January 1940, the United States has not yet entered the war. Americans read about Europe in newspapers over morning coffee. They watch newsreels before Saturday matinees. The war seems distant, tragic, someone else's problem. But in the offices of industrial planners, in the drafting rooms of automobile manufacturers, in the minds of men who understand what machines can do, something else is stirring. They are doing calculations. They are measuring capacity. They are preparing for a war that has not yet arrived. The German laughter in that Berlin meeting room represents more than simple mockery. It represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what America has become in the decades since the Great War. European military thinking remains rooted in concepts of quality over quantity, in the belief that superior engineering and tactical brilliance will always triumph. They look at American industry and see chaos, a sprawling, undisciplined collection of private enterprises with no central planning, no military tradition, no understanding of modern warfare. They see a country that in 1939 ranked 17th in the world in military strength, behind Romania. They see an army of 190,000 men equipped with obsolete weapons and training with wooden rifles. They see isolationism, naivety, weakness. What they fail to see is the infrastructure, the steel mills of Pittsburgh that can be retooled in weeks, the automotive assembly lines that can pivot from civilian to military production overnight, the electrical grid that powers factories 24 hours a day, the railroad networks that can move raw materials from coast to coast without interruption, the oil fields of Texas and Oklahoma that pump millions of barrels into refineries designed for maximum output, the culture of mass production that has been refined over 30 years of building automobiles, refrigerators, radios, washing machines, consumer goods manufactured at a scale that no European nation has ever attempted. The Germans see weakness. They should be seeing the sleeping giant that Admiral Yamamoto will warn Japan about after Pearl Harbor. In May 1940, as German tanks pour through the Ardennes forest and France begins its collapse, President Roosevelt stands before Congress and speaks numbers that sound like fantasy. He calls for the production of 50,000 aircraft per year. Military planners blanch at the figure. Aviation experts call it impossible. The entire American aircraft industry in 1939 produced 2,141 planes. Roosevelt is demanding an increase of more than 2,000%. He is demanding a miracle, but Roosevelt understands something that the generals are only beginning to grasp. He understands that America's strength does not lie in the size of its standing army or the sophistication of its current weapons. It lies in the factories. It lies in the capacity to transform civilian industry into military production on a scale that will overwhelm any enemy through sheer volume. The Sherman tank does not exist in January 1940. It is not even a concept. The U.S. Army is still using light tanks from the 1930s, machines that would be obsolete the moment they faced German armor. But in the drafting rooms of the Rock Island Arsenal and the Aberdeen Proving Ground, engineers are beginning to work on something different. They are not trying to build the best tank in the world. They are trying to build a good tank that can be produced in quantities large enough to equip entire armies. They are thinking about supply chains and spare parts. They are thinking about maintainability and crew training. They are thinking like Americans, about mass production, standardization, and overwhelming force through numbers. The M4 Sherman, when it finally emerges from these design sessions, reflects this philosophy completely. It is not the most powerful tank of World War II. It is not the most heavily armored. German Tigers and Panthers will outgun it, outarmor it, and outrange it in direct combat. But the Sherman has virtues that do not appear on technical specification sheets. It is reliable. It is easy to repair. It can be produced quickly. Most importantly, it can be produced in numbers that will flood Europe with American armor in quantities that no German planner ever imagined possible. The tank weighs 30 tons. It carries a 75 main gun and can achieve a top speed of 25 miles per hour on roads. The armor ranges from 1 inch to 3 inches in thickness, enough to stop small arms fire and shell fragments, but vulnerable to the German 88 anti-tank gun. The crew consists of 5 men: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, who also operates the hull-mounted machine gun. Inside, the tank is cramped but organized with American attention to human factors. The controls are labeled in English. The seats adjust. There are handholds exactly where soldiers need them. It is designed to be operated by civilians who have been trained for weeks, not years. Production begins in February 1942 at the Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio. The first tanks roll off the assembly line looking like they were born there, because in a sense, they were. The factory that previously built steam locomotives has been converted to tank production in a matter of months. The process applies Ford's assembly line principles to military hardware. Components arrive from suppliers across the country: armor plate from Bethlehem Steel, engines from General Motors, tracks from American steel foundries. Everything is standardized. Everything is interchangeable. A track assembly built in Chicago will fit a Sherman built in California. This is not how European tanks are made. This is not how any military equipment has ever been made. By the end of 1942, American factories are producing 1,000 Sherman tanks per month. By 1943, the rate climbs to 2,000 per month. The numbers accelerate beyond what anyone considered possible. The Lima plant alone produces a complete Sherman every 2 hours. Workers operate in 3 shifts around the clock. The assembly line never stops. Women rivet armor plate with pneumatic tools that shake the factory floors. Men in overalls guide engine blocks into hull cavities with precision that comes from repetition. The smell is metal and oil and electricity. The sound is industrial thunder, hammering, welding, engines testing, tracks clattering across concrete. The Sherman becomes more than a weapon. It becomes proof of concept. It becomes the physical manifestation of American industrial capacity unleashed. German intelligence begins receiving reports of American tank production in late 1942. The numbers seem impossible. They check and recheck their sources. Surely there has been a translation error. Surely the Americans are inflating their figures for propaganda purposes. The reports indicate that the United States is producing more tanks in a month than Germany produces in a quarter. This cannot be accurate. The German war economy is fully mobilized. Every factory, every worker, every resource has been directed toward military production. They are building tanks as fast as their industry allows. And yet these reports from across the Atlantic suggest that America is producing armor at 5 times the German rate. 10 times, 20 times. The reality is worse than the intelligence reports suggest. By 1943, the United States is not just building tanks. It is building an entire industrial ecosystem to support those tanks. Factories produce spare parts by the millions. Training facilities teach maintenance crews how to repair Shermans in field conditions. Supply chains stretch from American factories across the Atlantic to European battlefields, with precision that military planners previously thought impossible. When a Sherman throws a track in France, a replacement arrives within days. When an engine fails in Italy, a new power plant is already on a transport ship heading across the Mediterranean. The Germans design better tanks, but the Americans design better systems. The first Shermans arrive in North Africa in October 1942 for Operation Torch. British tankers who have been fighting the Afrika Korps in outdated Crusader and Matilda tanks see the American machines and do not know whether to laugh or cry. The Shermans look primitive compared to German armor. They look like something that might work in training exercises but will be death traps in real combat. The British crews, veterans of desert warfare who have watched their tanks burn under German guns, are skeptical of American promises. They have heard about mass production and industrial might. They want tanks that will keep them alive. What they discover in combat changes their assessment. The Sherman is not invincible. It burns when hit by anti-tank rounds. British crews will nickname it the Ronson, after an American lighter advertised as lighting first time, every time. But it is reliable. It does not break down in the desert heat the way British tanks do. It does not throw tracks on rough ground. The engine starts every morning. The gun fires every time. And when a Sherman is knocked out, another appears to replace it within hours. The British begin to understand what the Germans do not yet grasp. The Sherman's strength is not in individual superiority, but in availability. There are always more Shermans. There are always reinforcements. There are always spare parts. The German tank crews fighting in North Africa start noticing something strange in early 1943. They knock out American tanks with their superior 88mm guns and long-barreled Panzer IVs. They achieve kill ratios that favor German armor by 3-1, sometimes 5-1. And yet the Americans keep coming. Every destroyed Sherman is replaced by 2 more. Every knocked-out platoon is reinforced by a full company. The mathematics do not work in Germany's favor. A Tiger tank might destroy 10 Shermans before being knocked out itself, but those 10 Shermans are replaced within days while the Tiger takes months to rebuild. The industrial equation overwhelms tactical superiority. June 6, 1944, Normandy beaches, the greatest amphibious invasion in history. Among the thousands of vessels crossing the English Channel are specialized landing craft designed for one purpose: delivering Sherman tanks directly onto French beaches under fire. The American planners have thought through every detail. Waterproofed Shermans with extended exhaust stacks drive through 6 feet of water. Engineer variants with bulldozer blades clear obstacles. Flail tanks with rotating chains detonate mines. The Germans have spent 4 years building the Atlantic Wall. The Americans bring an invasion force that includes 2,000 Sherman tanks dedicated to the Normandy operation alone. 2,000. It is a number that represents more armor than the entire German army possessed in 1940 when they conquered France. The bocage country of Normandy becomes a nightmare for American tankers. The landscape is a maze of ancient hedgerows, thick walls of earth and roots that channel movement and create perfect ambush positions for German defenders. Panthers and tigers lurk in tree lines, their long guns able to penetrate Sherman armor at ranges where the American 75 cannot respond effectively. Tank battles become shooting galleries where German armor picks off Shermans with methodical precision. American tank crews experience losses that would break less determined forces. Some battalions lose 50% of their tanks in the first weeks of combat, but the tanks keep coming. Replacement Shermans arrive at Normandy beaches in numbers that stagger the German defenders. For every German tank destroyed, 10 more Shermans roll inland. American tactics adapt to the industrial reality. If they cannot win through superior equipment, they will win through overwhelming numbers and mobility. Sherman platoons learn to operate in combined arms groups with infantry and artillery. They learn to use smoke and suppressing fire. They learn that the answer to a Tiger is not a better tank, but 5 Shermans attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. The tactics are expensive in terms of crews and machines, but America can afford the expense. Germany cannot. The sound of the Sherman tank becomes a psychological weapon as the war progresses. The distinctive rumble of the Wright R975 radial engine, borrowed from aircraft design and adapted for armor, announces American presence with mechanical certainty. German soldiers in defensive positions learn to recognize that sound. It means more tanks than they can count. It means constant pressure. It means an enemy that does not stop coming. In the forests of the Ardennes, in the fields of Lorraine, in the industrial cities of the Ruhr, that sound becomes the soundtrack of defeat. Not the dramatic explosion of superior German tanks, but the relentless grinding approach of American industry transformed into mobile firepower. Inside the Sherman, the crew experiences the war through steel and noise. The driver sits in the left front hull, staring through a narrow periscope that reduces the world to a few yards of visible terrain. The assistant driver operates the hull machine gun from the right seat, feeding belt ammunition and scanning for infantry. In the turret, the commander stands with his head and shoulders exposed to enemy fire, coordinating movement and calling targets. The gunner sits below him, eye pressed to the sight, traversing the turret with electrical controls that feel futuristic compared to manual systems in other tanks. The loader works in cramped space behind the gun, pulling 75-pound shells from ready racks and slamming them into the breech while the turret rotates and the tank pitches over rough ground. The smell inside a Sherman in combat is cordite and sweat and oil and fear. The noise is overwhelming, engine roaring, tracks clattering, radio crackling with voices calling coordinates and warnings, the tremendous bang of the main gun firing that leaves ears ringing for hours. When a shell strikes the hull, the sound is like the crack of God's hammer. The tank fills with concussion and the scream of metal. Crews learn to judge immediately whether they have been penetrated. If the shell bounces, there is relief and perhaps a moment to breathe. If it punches through, there are seconds to evacuate before ammunition cooks off and transforms the 30-ton machine into a steel coffin. American tank crews develop a grim brotherhood based on shared vulnerability. They know they are riding in machines that German guns can penetrate at will. They know the survival statistics. They know that the Sherman is not the invincible weapon that propaganda suggests. But they also know something that sustains them through the terror. If their tank is destroyed, there will be another Sherman waiting for them. America can replace tanks faster than Germany can destroy them. This knowledge does not make combat less frightening, but it provides a form of institutional courage. Individual tanks may be lost, but the force as a whole cannot be stopped. The industrial symbolism of the Sherman becomes explicit in the minds of soldiers on both sides. For Americans, the tank represents the strength of the homeland, the factories and workers and resources that make overwhelming force possible. Letters home from tankers describe not just combat, but the sense of being connected to something larger than themselves. They are the sharp edge of American industry. Behind them stretch supply chains across oceans, factories working 3 shifts, trainloads of raw materials flowing from mines to mills to assembly plants. When they fire their 75 guns, they are firing Detroit and Pittsburgh and Chicago. When they advance across European landscapes, they carry with them the accumulated power of an entire continent mobilized for war. For German soldiers, the Sherman becomes a symbol of everything they are fighting against, and losing too. It represents the democratic chaos they despise, the mass production culture that Nazi ideology claims is inferior to German craftsmanship. Yet here is that inferior American culture, grinding them into dust beneath the tracks of 30,000 tanks that keep coming and never stop. German tank commanders who survive the war will write memoirs describing the psychological impact of facing endless American armor. They describe destroying 5 Shermans, 10 Shermans, watching the killing ground fill with burning metal, and then seeing more tanks appearing on the horizon. The realization that they are fighting not just an army but an entire industrial civilization is crushing. The production numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. From 1942 to 1945, American factories produce 49,234 Sherman tanks. 49,234. The number is difficult to conceptualize. If every Sherman produced were lined up end to end, they would stretch 287 miles, from New York City to Pittsburgh. If one Sherman was completed every hour of every day, the production run would take 6 years. But American industry does not produce 1 Sherman per hour. At peak production in 1943, factories complete a new Sherman every 60 minutes. 36 tanks per day, more than 1,000 per month. The industrial capacity that German planners laughed at in 1940 becomes an unstoppable avalanche by 1944. Germany, by comparison, produces approximately 6,000 Panther tanks and 1,347 Tigers during the entire war. These are superior machines in many technical respects. A Tiger tank in a defensive position with good sight lines can dominate a battlefield. But Germany cannot produce Tigers fast enough to matter strategically. The math is simple and brutal. America produces 7 Shermans for every Panther and 36 Shermans for every Tiger. Even accounting for the German advantage in tank-to-tank combat, the numbers overwhelm strategy. This is the lesson that German planners should have learned in that Berlin meeting room in January 1940. This is the truth they discovered too late. The symbolic object that represents American abundance in this story is not food or music or any cultural artifact. It is the spare track assembly that every Sherman carries strapped to its hull as additional armor. These tracks are not decorative. They are functional redundancy, replacement parts carried into battle, because American logistics planners assume that components will be damaged and need immediate replacement. The spare tracks represent a mindset that is uniquely American. The assumption of abundance, the expectation of replacement, the industrial confidence that says if something breaks, there is always more. German tanks do not carry spare tracks. German logistics do not assume ready replacement of major components. When a German tank throws a track, it is recovered if possible or abandoned if not. When a Sherman throws a track, the crew installs the spare and continues the mission. This difference in approach, this fundamental assumption about the availability of resources, permeates every aspect of American and German military culture. It shows in maintenance procedures, in tactical doctrine, In the morale of soldiers who know they will be resupplied versus soldiers who know they are fighting with irreplaceable equipment. The spare track bolted to the Sherman's hull is more than armor. It is a promise. It says, "Behind you stands an industrial system that will not let you fail for lack of equipment. You can be bold because we can replace what is lost." This promise is kept throughout the war. American tank crews advance with confidence not because their machines are invincible, but because they know the factories back home will keep building more. By late 1944, as Allied armies close in on Germany from east and west, the industrial disparity becomes impossible to ignore. German factories are being bombed around the clock by American B-17s during the day and British Lancasters at night. Raw materials are scarce. Fuel is rationed. Skilled workers have been conscripted into military service or killed in air raids. Tank production falls to a fraction of wartime peak. The Tigers and Panthers that roll off German assembly lines in 1945 are made with inferior materials, assembled by forced labor, quality controlled by workers who are exhausted and terrified. Meanwhile, American factories continue producing Shermans at rates that do not diminish until the war ends. The last Sherman rolls off the Lima production line on March 26, 1945, a machine identical in quality to those built 3 years earlier, assembled by workers who are well-fed and well-paid, delivered to a military that has more tanks than it needs for final operations. The transformation in perception occurs gradually among German soldiers and commanders. In 1940, they laugh at American industrial capacity. In 1942, they dismiss the Sherman as inferior equipment. In 1943, they adapt tactics to exploit the Sherman's weaknesses. By 1944, they are fighting desperately to destroy as many Shermans as possible while knowing that their efforts are futile. By 1945, the sight of American armor advancing triggers immediate retreat or surrender. The psychological shift is complete. The Sherman tank, this supposedly inferior mass-produced machine, has become the symbol of American inevitability. It represents the end of German ambitions. It represents the victory of industrial democracy over militaristic fascism. The epilogue to this story is written in the ruins of Berlin and the factories of Detroit. When the war ends in May 1945, thousands of Sherman tanks sit in depot yards across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. They are surplus equipment. America has built so many tanks that even after equipping its own armies and supplying its allies, there are machines left over. Some are sold to friendly nations. Some are scrapped for metal. Some are left to rust in foreign landscapes. The abundance is so overwhelming that tanks become disposable, a concept that would have seemed insane to German planners calculating every ton of steel and every liter of fuel. The lesson of the Sherman tank is not about military technology. It is about systems and scale. It is about the power of an industrial democracy to mobilize resources in ways that authoritarian states cannot match. Germany organized its economy through central control and ideological purity. America organized its economy through profit motive and competitive innovation. German factories produced masterpieces. American factories produced masses. When these two systems collided on the battlefields of Europe, the outcome was inevitable. Quality could not overcome quantity when quantity reached overwhelming proportions. Craftsmanship could not defeat mass production when mass production operated at American scale. The laughter in that Berlin meeting room in January 1940 was the sound of men who did not understand what was about to happen to them. They measured American strength by European standards and found it wanting. They compared Detroit to the Ruhr Valley and concluded that America was unprepared for modern war. They were correct in their immediate assessment. America in 1940 was unprepared, but they failed to understand the speed at which American industry could transform from civilian to military production. They failed to grasp the scale at which American factories could operate once fully mobilized. Most critically, they failed to recognize that a democracy fighting for survival would prove more capable of sustained industrial warfare than any fascist state. The Sherman tank rolled into Europe not as the best weapon of World War II, but as proof that America could produce good enough weapons in numbers large enough to decide the conflict through sheer industrial weight. 50,000 Sherman tanks, each one a small miracle of American manufacturing, each one a mobile piece of the industrial democracy that built it. The tank crews who fought and died in these machines did so knowing they were part of something larger than individual battles. They were the physical manifestation of American capacity. They were the answer to the question posed in 1940, what happens when you laugh at American industry and then give it reasons to prove you wrong? The answer rumbled across Europe on 30-ton tracks, painted olive drab, carrying five-man crews, smelling of oil and determination. It came in numbers that overwhelmed strategy and tactics. It came with spare parts and replacement crews and logistical support that never failed. It came with the confidence of a nation that knew it could produce whatever was needed for as long as necessary. The Sherman was not the sword that won the war. It was the hammer. And American industry swung that hammer 50,000 times until the laughter stopped, and the war ended, and the world understood what industrial democracy could achieve when it decided to build something in quantity. The sound of that hammer still echoes in the silence that followed.